And Senator Dan Stec joins us now. Welcome. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Tom.
Appreciate you being here. We just heard the Debar Pond Lodge land swap has been approved twice now by the Assembly, but so far no vote in the Senate.
Right, that's correct. Right at the end of session, it looked like it was going to get a vote, and something happened. There were some people, environmental groups, had some questions, and I think they leaned on some of the senators, and they said, hey, all right, we don't need to do this year. And the other thing is constitutional amendments need to pass twice in two different legislatures. So we really didn't lose anything this year. Next year is the second year of this session. So it's more important to make sure we get it done next year so that it could go a second time the year after that.
And then it will go to voters after that?
And then it would go to voters, yes.
And are you optimistic about it?
I am. I think it's a good bill. There's no reason for it to not pass. But anytime you're talking about land swaps or, a property and forest preserve in the Adirondacks, everyone takes a really hard look at that, as they should. But this is an old, beautiful property on a lake, and we'd like to see it protected and preserved. And so this swap would increase the size of the forest preserve significantly, and at the same time, the private group that would take over ownership would maintain public access to it. It's a good bill, and I'm confident that we'll be able to get it passed next year.
You did mention there are some environmentalists and wilderness groups against it. They don't like the idea of the land swap. They're not thrilled about the 400 acres between Meacham Palm and State Route 30. And also they raised the point about they worry that the private group could ultimately reduce the public's access to that area.
And I think that the public access concern has been addressed. I mean, the way to address that is in legislation, and the group is certainly very willing to grant whatever it needs to ensure public access. So I don't think the public access is a real hurdle. I think the larger hurdle was the swap, that I think they wanted more than 400 acres for, again, this is a 6-acre parcel, but I think the environmental groups are seeing an opportunity to say, hey, we can do better than 400 acres. We want more. And so the question there is, what do they want? And again, that's all stuff that could get hashed out after first passage. We don't need to have that question resolved before first passage. But I've been around long enough to see how these constitutional amendments involving the forest preserve go, and everyone is going to hold everything as much as possible for leverage. Certainly the environmental groups, if they get 1,000 acres out of the deal, they want 1,000, and I understand that. So then the question is, hey, when's enough? We say pencils down, this is a good deal, and I think we're going to get there.
Ultimately, do you think statewide voters will go for it?
I do. I think once these things get, because I do think the voters realize that these constitutional amendments, generally speaking, and especially Adirondack ones, are very thoroughly vetted. So I do expect that once it does go to the voters, it'll be approved.
The Environmental Committee held a hearing this past week on expanding the bottle bill in New York State. Last update was back in 2009 when plastic water bottles were added. What changes are being proposed now?
All right, so there's been a talk about increasing the types of bottles further to involve wine bottles and things like that. And then in addition to that, there's discussion about increasing the deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents. Obviously, the argument is the bill was written, it's been 5 cents since the 1980s. Increasing to a dime, people will say that's the doubling. And, the argument is an understandable one. Hey, this is going to come out of the consumer's pocket. So that's where some of the concern is. But there's a competing bill that would just focus on the handling fee and amending that. The redemption centers, they've been operating, they get 3.5 cents per bottle. That's been their redemption rate, and it's been that way for decades. But yet over the years, their cost of doing business has gone up, inflation's gone up for them, minimum wage has gone up for them. So when you look at the redemption centers and all the costs that have been thrust on them, but yet nothing's changing on the revenue side for them, they're losing money and they're starting to close. So now the discussion is, hey, do we want these redemption centers around or not? Is there value? And the cynical way to look at this, and some of the redemption centers point this issue out, is whatever is not returned, the state pockets that money. And last year, over $90 million went to the state's general fund out of the bottle deposit. And that goes to the general fund where the state can do whatever they want with it. I'd like to see, if nothing else, the handling fee change so that our redemption centers can continue to operate, or we're going to have the whole purpose of the bottle bill originally was to prevent this stuff from being thrown away roadside and polluting our environment. We want them recycled. So we've got to make sure that the system is kept up to date. I suspect something will get done, but the redemption centers are screaming for something to happen now, and it's extremely unlikely for us to go back into special session to do this, which means we're looking at next year. And the way that Albany works, this is likely to get done in part of the budget. And there's standalone legislation that would fix it, does not need to be done as part of the budget.
Are the environmental concerns legitimate? Is there concern that too much plastic is going to landfills?
Our plastics recycling isn't where it could be or should be. Another bill that we had a hearing on related to this is the extended producer bill, and that's about recycling in general. There's a debate: do we want to chemically, do you grind it up and reuse it mechanically in things like park benches? There's only so much you can do with that. Or do you want to heat it up and break it down to its elemental components and then reuse it in other processes? That's a broader discussion, but they're concerned that the waste stream is not, we're not hitting recycling targets, so we're falling behind other recycling targets in other states and other countries. And so the push is, from the people that are advocating this, that they want to capture more of the waste stream. And I understand that too. It's just, we got to make sure that we don't crush the consumer either. There's got to be a balance there.
And have you made up your mind on the bottle bill yet, the expanded bottle bill?
I'm concerned about bringing it to a dime. I really am. I think that's another cost to the consumer. But there's bills out there. I suspect that there's a compromise that will be reached that will fix the handling fee amount without necessarily having to go to a dime.
Let's talk about cell service. Still spotty in many parts of the North Country.
It is. I just did a legislative mail piece, a survey to constituents that live in or in towns that are wholly or partly in the park. So it didn't go to Plattsburgh, it didn't go to Glens Falls, but it went to all the communities in and around the Adirondack Park. I wanted to hear from residents that live in the park what their thoughts are on the quality of their cell service, how important their cell service is. It was a very simple 5-question survey. We sent out about 37,000. We got 2,000 back. A lot of people will say, "Oh, that's not a lot." Actually, for a legislative mailer, 2,000 is a high response rate. So we were very pleased with the response rate, and the numbers were not surprising at all. Over 80% said, hey, they would put the quality of cell service ahead of invisible towers. And one of the questions that jumped off the page at me the most was, we asked how many, do you own a cell phone? And if you do you use it exclusively, or do you still have a landline? Not surprising, a very high number said they had a cell phone, 99%. Actually, I knew it would be high, but I was surprised it was 99. And 2/3 of those people say they use it exclusively. So that means there are people that are living in the park that are completely reliant to reach the outside world on a cell phone. For me, the argument is it's a public safety need. I'm all for a public-private partnership. I think that there's a role to be played. Government needs towers for radio equipment, for state police, for our highway departments and whatnot, our first responders. So let's be smart about it. Let's have the government, like we just did the broadband. It wasn't perfect, but that was a public-private partnership that expanded broadband, and that money's still being spent, so there's improvements that are still coming from that. Again, I'm not saying it was wonderfully done, but we've improved it. Let's take that, learn from the lessons there, and apply it to cell towers, and find a way to incentivize or mandate, hey, we're going to build one tower and everyone's going to go on it and everyone's going to share the cost of it. And I've asked sheriff's offices, what percentage of 911 calls originate on a cell phone? They're all saying the vast majority. Some would give me a specific number, 75, 80%. That's your cell phone. So you can have the best trained, best equipped first responders in the world, and if that initial outreach doesn't work because you don't have a cell connection, then what good does it do you? I've shared that information with the governor's office. I've been working with the second floor on that closely, and I've been working with the APA on that. Hey, it's been over 20 years since the tower policy was written. Before the iPhone was invented, this tower policy predates that. Give a little flexibility on height, incentivize co-location. There's a way to do this without ruining view shed. But I've been meeting with the cell tower, and the cell phone companies, and they all say, look, we need to go higher. No one wants to build a 1,000-foot tower, 500-foot tower. No one's asking for that. Everyone's got to remember, these cell phone companies don't want to build that tower 1 foot higher than absolutely necessary. But they need to clear the trees, and you need to factor in that the trees are going to grow. They're going to get taller. And again, there's a way to do this.
And you talk about the emergency 911 calls, and not just the Adirondack Park, but gaps in rural areas of New York. And sadly, there was the tragedy in Washington County.
That's right, outside the park. But again, the lack of cell phone service almost certainly contributed to them pulling into the wrong driveway. It certainly doesn't excuse what happened at that property when the owner answers the door with a shotgun and shoots at cars driving away. He hits a 20-year-old woman in the car, and then they had to drive 8 miles on rural roads. It took 20 minutes Imagine you're driving your friend who's bleeding from the neck, and you got to drive 20 minutes to make a 911 call while your friend's dying. Again, we'll never know. No one has a crystal ball to say what would have happened. In all likelihood, it wouldn't have changed the outcome. But you know what? The next time it could.
Governor Hochul has signed a bill that you sponsored to better combat aquatic invasive species. It'll enable town boards, for example, to combat invasive species like Asian clams, zebra and quagga mussels, round gobies. The state law that's been on the books for a number of years covers aquatic invasive plants like water chestnut and milfoil.
Right.
But for a number of years, you've thought we should be covering these other species as well.
There's a lake behind Great Escape called Glen Lake. There's about 100 people that live along the lake, and they wanted help controlling milfoil. And there was a law in the books that allowed a town to create a district, like you would a water district or a sewer district, an aquatic invasive plant district. They've had fantastic water quality. They took care of the milfoil problem. $100, $150 a year. I liken it to less than pool chemicals to control the weeds in the lake that your home is on. It's been a success, but in doing that, of course, also down at the time, and when I was in local government, Lake George, dealing with Asian clams, zebra mussels. If it had been Asian clam or zebra mussel in Glen Lake instead of a plant, the existing law would not allow a town board to do that. All I was looking to do is say, hey, take that existing law that says you're authorized to do this for aquatic invasive plants, and basically I just said, and I wanted to add, and invertebrates. Now, obviously, it wasn't quite that simple. The lawyers chewed on a little more. But what's nice is that this was an idea of mine that I took from my local government experience. I brought with me to the legislature. It took a few years to get it through. The EC liked it, and we got it through. And the governor just signed it a week or so ago. I don't know how many towns are looking to jump and use that right away, but it's another tool in the toolbox. If a town has a situation where they've got an invertebrate that's invasive that they want to address with a taxing district, it's a funding mechanism available to them if they want.
Dan Stec, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, my pleasure, Tom. Thank you.